Check, check.
Shoop. Testing, 1, 2, 3. Checking the microphone.
Sangha, can y'all hear me okay? Give me a thumbs up. Thanks so much, Joe. You see Alan here, right? He's in the back there, Joe. These are my morning folks. Again, good morning, everyone. In the background, it's just really bad. It's like all the echoing and things. But welcome this morning again to the ASZC Zen Center. We are so grateful to have one of our very own, Keisei Andrew Dietz, speaking this morning. And also we have Hojo Sensei with him because they do a lot of work together related to creativity. But just a little bit about Keisei. I wanted to just do a brief bio, and then Sensei, please feel free because y'all have been working together for a long period of time. So Keisei Andrew Dietz is a marketing entrepreneur, writer, and creative coach to executives and artists. Keisei is founder and president of Creative Growth and co-founder of the Partner of Creative Influence, a marketing firm that creates content to grow revenue and relationships for businesses to businesses companies. Keisei's latest book, Follow the Meander, An Indirect Route to More Creative Life, Science Thunder Press 2020. That's his latest books, but he also has written other books, the opening playbook, a professional guide to building relationships that grow revenue. And the last folk hero, that's one of my favorite actually, a story of race, art, power, and profit. He's been a board member of the Museum of Contemporary Art of Georgia, Atlanta College of Art, Image and Film Video, ADL Southwest, Vox Teen Communications, and on the ASZC Zen recently, the board. He was born in NYC, raised in Connecticut, and Keisei splits his time now between Atlanta, Georgia, and Cashiers. He and his family have a beautiful home up there. I pimp him on Facebook all the time related to that waterfall that's on their property. So again, with a big Gosh show, and after the Gosh show, we want to make sure we do our opening Dharma verses, folks, because I always forget to do that. But again, welcome our very own Keisei Andrew Dietz this morning for a conversation. So again, let's do our opening Dharma verses.
The unsurpassed, profound, and wondrous Dharma is rarely met with, even in 100,000 million kalpas. Now we may see and hear it, accept and maintain it. May we unfold the meaning of the Tathagata's truth.
Did you want to say anything else about
You
Keisei?
can't handle the truth. Yeah, Andrew, Keisei, I don't know, I can't remember how long ago we started working together. Maybe 10 years?
At least, yeah.
It's hard to remember. But there's a point at which, as I always say, there's no money in Zen. I had to, was figuring out what else I could do to earn income. And I asked Andrew one day, I said, do you think I could sell my art? He'd been kind of a fan of my art, I think, by then, liked it. And he said, well, I think you can if you can tell the story. And so he arranged to introduce me to Yukai Lin, who is the owner of the gallery I've been with now over a dozen years. He was in Buckhead at that time. Chance would have it, he had a show coming up, and one of his artists had, I don't know what happened, he wasn't going to be able to show, so he had an empty room. Andrew and I mounted a one-man show here, and Yukai and several other people, gallery owners, people in the art world that Andrew invited came to the show. And sure enough, Yukai took 24 pieces, selected 24 pieces to show in the next show. That's how I got started in the gallery. I'd been with a gallery, who's no longer in business, Tiang Gallery in Buckhead, for over a year. But I had pulled my art out of there after a year. She hadn't put me in any shows, so it was just like my stuff was in the back room. And then Andrew invited me. We talked a lot. We met a lot. He's going to cover all this, so I'm not going to go into detail. Talked about creativity, Zen, and design, etc., design thinking. And we began offering seminars. We did some workshops here, and we would go out to businesses as part of the outreach program for Atlanta Soda Zen Center. And he and his designer friends developed a couple of pamphlets for it. One is called Provocative Pause, which I'm sure he can tell you something about that, and Meditation at Work. These pamphlets are available in the front for any of those of you who are interested in, just possibly interested in that. Just take one. If you have a group that you work with, a company that is creatively oriented, which most are these days, obviously, with IT and prevalence of computer programming, etc. Please feel free to take one and let Andrew know if you think you might want to host a seminar of that nature. Without further ado, over to you.
All right. Thanks. So when we unfold the meaning of the Tathagata's truth, the word unfold is interesting. It's folded up somehow. We like to fold things in this world. We like to make order out of them. It's sort of a natural human state. That said, creativity is also a part of what it means to be human. And they sometimes seem at odds with each other. And I'm going to read just a bit, if I can find it, one sentence from, or one paragraph from a book called, not my book, that's not what it's called. It's called The Zen of Creativity by John Dido Laurie. And one of the things that always appealed, well, really first brought me into Zen, I came in through creative arts, through a drama coach when I was 18 years old in college. And so creativity and Zen have always been linked for me. And the appeal, the one appeal of the Atlanta Soda Zen Center was Sensei and his heritage, his upbringing in creativity, in the arts, and how he's woven that for himself and for us into our practice. So we've got this idea on the one hand of folding things, of making order of everything, of maybe even controlling things we wish wouldn't change so much, right? We know that, the root of suffering. But John Dido Laurie says, creativity is our birthright. It's an integral part of being human, as basic as walking, talking, and thinking. Throughout our evolution as a species, it has sparked innovations in science, beauty in the arts, and revelation in religion. Every human life contains its seeds and is constantly manifesting it. Whether we're building a sandcastle, preparing Sunday dinner, painting a canvas, walking through the woods, or programming a computer. The creative process, like a spiritual journey, is intuitive, experiential, and non-linear. So it was that idea of, well, a couple of things, unfolding the truth. And one way that we all do that in different ways. One way for me is writing, drawing, and various other creative activities. And part of the truth that I was trying to unfold was the how do we manage to live with the paradoxes that we're presented with? We're both born with the kind of innate ability and maybe even innate desire to make order out of things, to make them linear. And at the same time, we have this tremendous capacity to create, which is often fueled by a sort of nonlinear approach to the world. We've got plenty of linear in this world. I wanted to celebrate the nonlinear a little more, and that's where the idea of follow the meander came from. We're constrained by our linearity. Our society imposes it on us, we impose it on ourselves. One of the stories I have in this book is about my daughter when she was 4. And she went to, she had to be interviewed by this private school to get into kindergarten here in Atlanta. It's very hard to get into some of these schools in Atlanta. And so she had to go and be observed with a bunch of other kids, and they made the parents watch, which was torturous. They took 3 kids and they sat them at a table. One of them, my daughter, they said to one boy, "Little boy, What do you want to be when you grow up? Because, at 4, you're supposed to know. This is the idea of our linear world. We're supposed to know with certainty what we want to be when we grow up. Little boy says, I want to be an astronaut. Why do you want to be an astronaut? That's wonderful. I want to explore the outer reaches of space, he says. Okay, no coaching there, clearly, by the parents. Little girl next to the astronaut. John Glenn Jr., little girl next to him. What do you want to be when you grow up? A doctor. Hey, that's fantastic. Just taking notes. Doctor. Why do you want to be a doctor? I just like the idea of learning about the human body and helping people. And well, what kind of doctor do you want to be? 4-year-old girl? A surgeon. I start to sweat a little bit. I don't know what's coming next. Jesse Dietz, what do you want to be when you grow up? A ghost. Okay, making note, check for mental disturbance. Why do you want to be a ghost? I just like scaring people sometimes. I was proud of her for her nonlinear answer. Of course, she did not get into that school. But that's the kind of world we live in, right? So that's what we're dealing with. It's hard to live a Zen life when you're, which is kind of about cultivating some level of spontaneity, the ability to respond, not plan and attack life all the time, but be able to respond to what comes to us, and it's got agility in large part. So this book was really about trying to celebrate that part of us, that ability to go with the flow, let's say. And so that was one aspect of this book. The other was Sensei and his influence, and my curiosity about his ability to I guess his ability to tackle the intersection of Zen and creativity, and not only communicate that to us, but demonstrate that to us. And all you have to do is sit here in the Atlanta Center, and you can see all around us things that were created by Sensei, from this table to the...
Nope, not the table.
Not
just
the table.
Just the top.
Just the top of the table.
Just a hinged top with
The benches these guys are sitting on, the paintings in the back, much of this room, his own books, music, etc. So on the one hand, there was Sensei, and then he started to tell me, as he's told, probably we all know, if you know something about Sensei's background, he studied design at the Institute of Design in Chicago, got an undergraduate and graduate degree there. And one of his mentors, and a guy who at one point also taught at the Institute of Design, was Buckminster Fuller. If you don't know Buckminster Fuller, look him up online. Great, fun name, Buckminster Fuller. And he was the egghead that his name implies. He was a genius inventor, creator, visionary. If you've been to Epcot Center in Disney and you know that big dome building, that's a geodesic dome design. That was his creation. If you've been to a playground and you know that sort of half dome made out of triangle shapes, that's also a play on one of his inventions. That's just one of the things he did. But at any rate, I got curious about Buckminster Fuller. The Sensei can quote, kind of chapter and verse. But rather than read Buckminster Fuller, because he's kind of a dense read, I decided to go with The Idiot's Guide, which was a biography of Buckminster Fuller, and I found the most recent version, and it happened to be written by a friend of mine. And this friend of mine is also up there in the top, 3 most creative people I know in the world. And this guy, Jonathan Keats, is one of those other characters. So this book, while it talks about creativity in the context of Zen, does so through the kind of interconnecting stories of Sensei, Jonathan Keats, this friend of mine who's a conceptual artist and a writer and an experimental philosopher. Just to give you an idea of what this guy's like, he copyrighted his brain, claiming it was a product he built neural network by neural network, and then he sold futures contracts in his ideas. So Sensei, Jonathan Keats, and Buckminster Fuller. Now, Jonathan Keats was actually invited up to a place called Black Mountain College Arts Center. Black Mountain College is a defunct college, but in the middle of the 20th century was the center of avant-garde creativity in this country. Located in New York? Nah. LA? Uh-oh. Chicago? Nah. Black Mountain, North Carolina. At the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains, a place that was otherwise known as a Christian retreat center, in 1933 became the hub of creativity and one of the U.S. locations of the Bauhaus after Hitler kicked it out of Germany. The Bauhaus Art School landed in two places: one, Black Mountain College; the other, the Institute of Design in Chicago. Black Mountain College is where Buckminster Fuller actually erected his first geodesic dome. Anyway, again, these are for other times. I'd suggest you look up Black Mountain College. It's a fascinating place. Anyway, Keats was up there, invited to be a resident scholar. And while I went to visit him up there on the banks of the French Broad River, which meanders through downtown Asheville, North Carolina, and then for miles beyond, Jonathan tells me about his upcoming project in which he's going to create a clock that tells time by tracking the meander of a river over thousands of years. Well, that's a very, kind of, I don't know what kind of battery you need to keep a clock going for thousands of years, but that was the kind of clock he wanted to create. And he actually had already begun to do that in Anchorage, Alaska, measuring the flow of the rivers up there. So Follow the Meander is the title of this book, and it came from that conversation and what he ultimately did in Anchorage, which was to create there you can go to Anchorage, AlaskaRiverTime.org, and you'll see a digital clock online. It's also projected on the outside of the Anchorage Museum. And this clock tells time based on the flow of the river, not based on, the breakdown of a cesium atom or however it's scientifically told. Interesting. So anyway, those were the inspirations behind the book. That's the theme of the book. But the meat of the book, which I'll talk about now, is really my effort to wrestle with, to unfold what Sensei had created and what we ultimately put into a workshop. You heard the words provocative pause. So there are 4 things that we ended up really looking at, I think, in this creativity and Zen workshop. One was provocation. How do we shake people up, get them to think differently, shake ourselves up, get ourselves to think differently. Pause, the idea of, how we can almost let me back up for a second. We talk about the resolution of opposites or the harmony of differences. And at its root, our sitting is our practice of resolving, or not resolving, but sitting with things that are apparently different and seeing their sameness. Looking at what seem to be opposing forces and seeing how they work together. And so provocation and pause are like that. And they're very helpful in our creative efforts and our creative living, right? So we get provoked. Just by living, we're provoking each other. We're provoked by the things around us. We're provoked, at a philosophical level. We're provoked at a very fundamental level. As you drive through traffic, you're provoked. As you turn on the TV, you're provoked. Somebody has a different idea than you, you're provoked. So provocation is an assertion, if you will. And pause is a slow stop to be still and to integrate. Provocation is to shake things up. A pause is to let things settle. So 2 of the things we want to do as we apply, I guess, our Zen practice to the creative world is remember that provocation and pause are kind of two halves of the same coin. The other two, there's a pause for you. The other two are pattern and play. Pattern goes back to that idea of folding things up, or finding, putting things in order, recognizing, breaking down what seems chaotic and finding a linearity to it in some way, or a connection between the elements of it. And patterns can be, we can create patterns. That's a creative act, right? But patterns can also lock us up. They can be the canal that channels the water rather than letting it flow and meander on its own course. Right? So patterns can be helpful. We're human beings are pattern powered, but our capacity can be clogged by that power as well, our creative capacity. Play is a way to sort of, again, other side of that coin. Creating patterns can be play, but play is also the idea of breaking those patterns down, as recognizing patterns and reconfiguring them to maybe create something new. So what we do when we try to insert nonlinearity or meandering into otherwise linear processes, and there is the idea, by the way, of a creative process. The idea of having a creative process, a linear way to make something new, really came out of the same place that channelizing bodies of water and keeping them from being meandering came from, the Industrial Revolution. In the Industrial Revolution, engineers began to straighten waterways out because they'd run faster and that would help commerce. Right now, the opposite is happening. We've seen the damage that artificial straightening has done, and we're trying to re-meander rivers in many cases. But that same philosophy of straightening things out during the Industrial Revolution began to get applied to innovation and creativity. And it was in the early 1900s that people started to chronicle creative processes. Really, here's how you create. First, you have to do this. Then you have to do this next step. Then you have to do this next step, and then this. Then you'll have created something, which seems antithetical, counterintuitive, right? So what we do to meander are we focus on patterns, recognizing them, seeing them, breaking them down, reinventing them. That's part of the creative process. Play, just goofing around. Kurt Vonnegut once said, "We're on this earth to fart around." Just to goof around, just goofing around. Purposeful purposelessness, or maybe just purposelessness, is a great way to let ideas step forward towards us. So one way is sort of a mechanical approach of really looking at and working with something, patterns. The other is a purposeless way of doing that, letting things reveal themselves. Provocation and pause are similar. So those are the four things. And in this book, I've got some recommendations about ways you can activate those four elements to put more meander into your creative activities or your creative living. So pattern, play, provocation, and pause. And then the other part is, there's always what you do, and then there's how you do it. What we do is we sit and we meditate. How we do it is, the Soto Zen way of doing that, perhaps. What we do is we, in Zen or in Buddhism, is we try to reduce suffering, or we try to understand and let go of suffering, or stop causing more suffering than is already there. How we do it is, in a way, the Eightfold Path. So if what we do with regard to meandering is provocation, play, pause, and patterns and working with those. How we do it is what I call the Eightfold Shuffle. So what's a shuffle? Well, it's different than a path. Path is somewhat linear, could be. A shuffle is definitely not linear. What is a shuffle? Well, the word, so this is from the book. The word shuffle often refers to something that moves in a slow, shambling way, like the lazy dragging of feet. Uncle Mo shuffled into his Delray condo after playing shuffleboard with Larry and Curly. That's not the kind of shuffle meant here. Swing, so shuffle and swing. Swing runs into its own semantic problems. Ever meet a swinger? Uncle Mo and Aunt Flossie greased up and headed to their love pad for some horizontal swinging with like-minded couples. Definitely not the kind of swinging meant here. The Meanderers' shuffle and swing are musical. They're the groove you hear in some of the best classic blues, rock, and jazz. Rather than a steady, straight 8-note rhythm, a shuffle unevenly divides and alternates notes with a long one falling on the beat and a short one on the upbeat in between. It's the sound that inhabits Robert Johnson's Sweet Home Chicago, Muddy Waters' Got My Mojo Working, Stevie Ray Vaughan's Pride and Joy. It's got an inherent power, an indelible pulse, an irreverent attitude. Born of African rhythms unwillingly hauled to America, jazz and blues and their shuffle groove are self-proclaimed declarations of independence. Here's a way Cornel West described this and the idea of shuffle and swing in jazz. I use the term jazz here not so much as a term for a musical art form, as for a mode of being in the world, an improvisational mode of protean, fluid, and flexible dispositions toward reality, suspicious of either or viewpoints, dogmatic pronouncements, or supremacist ideologies. So the idea of the shuffling eightfold path is an attitude we take towards our lives, but specifically in regard to this book, towards our own creativity. It's a joyful, open, offbeat, attitude. Again, improvisational attitude, suspicious of either or. I don't know about suspicious, but letting go of either or. And so the shuffling eightfold path that I write about just basically plagiarizes Buddha's eightfold path, but puts it in the context of the creative effort. So shuffling view is recognizing the endlessly evolving nature of things as a reason for joy. That's what creative meanderers often do. So fluid perspective leaves us open to possibilities. Even when times are tough, a shuffling view sees that times are just as likely to swing in the other direction. That's an attitude towards how we create, right? We've got at least one other artist in the room, Michael. Right, Michael was telling me the other day about a portrait he painted, right, where he, had to approach that with a certain intention, an intention to really capture the essence of a particular person, took a lot of shuffling to get there. I saw the end result. It was really wonderful. But the intention was what sort of, I think, allowed him to get there. It's this idea of doing right? The same idea we have in Zen applies. It works its way into the creative process. At minimum, do no harm. At best, Buckminster Fuller proposed, use your creative capabilities to do the most good for the most people with the fewest resources. So there are people who use their creativity for evil. Right? How do we use ours for good? Shuffling speech, skillful use of words fosters constructive creative outcomes. Shuffling speech is using words to enable freedom of thought and to expand options. One of the interventions that we do in the program that Sensei mentioned earlier is using words and mixing those words up to help us think differently. So words can get us stuck. Words can free us if we let go of letting them substitute for what's, what's real and true, which is beyond words. And shuffling action, again, the ability to kind of, well, for one thing, just take action. You're standing on the top of the 100-foot pole. Do you do nothing or do you do something? Take action. We don't know what will happen, but we move forward anyway. Shuffling livelihood, same thing. How do you make a living? Astronaut, surgeon, ghost? What do you do if you're a creative meanderer? Buckminster Fuller said, the things to do are the things that need doing, that you see need to be done, and that no one else seems to see need to be done. Shuffling livelihood for meanderers means bringing whatever creative skills we have to get done what needs doing. And it goes on into some examples. And shuffling effort, I think you get the idea, is all of these, shuffling mindfulness, shuffling concentration, all are basically applying this eightfold path and just taking a twist on it to, I guess, Zen isn't meant to be practical, but it does have some practical benefits nonetheless. This book was a meandering effort for me to wrestle with and to unfold what these experiences of Zen, how I pick them up and carrying them into my life. The book was dedicated to my daughters because I hope that they'll, not necessarily take up the Zen path, but take, or at least the label of Zen, but take up the pathway of Zen, or the meandering pathway. I don't know, Sensei, what else?
A couple things you didn't mention specifically was mentoring. So the meandering and mentors have been very important in my life, as they have been in yours. And that's, I think, what you're hoping for your daughters, that they know how to find a mentor or recognize a mentor. They say when you're ready, your teacher appears, but you may not recognize you.
Right.
Oops.
Exactly.
And the other is the role of chance and the exercises. And these came out of my teaching at the Art Institute in the University of Illinois in Chicago in the 60s. I had to develop exercises for sparking creativity. Kids coming in out of high school, don't make me think, just tell me what to do. And the idea of shuffling, if you take a deck of cards and shuffle, and one of my students literally made a deck of cards, half of which were definitions of words from the dictionary, and the other half were pictures pulled from the newspapers and so forth. And so one was a toy, something trifling or something. And the picture was all these toy machine guns. It's called synectics, and you put two things together, and a third new thing comes out of the two. It isn't either of the one separately. That's the principle of synectics, which is a fundamental piece of creativity, sometimes defined as new combination of two things. We don't really create anything. We create new relationships between things.
Yeah, the idea of mentors is interesting because if you're a meanderer, if you're a creative meanderer, you may, it's true, you may push away the idea of a mentor telling you what to do. You want to find your own path. I write, even the most recalcitrant drop of river water is channeled by its surroundings. even meandering nonconformists and iconoclasts need mentors and guides. But meanderers, by definition, don't want to follow others, and meandering mentors may not want to be followed. The mentorship of meanderers is often, even necessarily, vicarious. Again, we're all, from a creative standpoint, even if Sensei and I didn't often have conversations about these things, just watching him behave and do is mentoring. In a similar way, I know Buckminster Fuller wasn't actually, he wasn't a professor for a class of yours and didn't take you under his wing.
And you couldn't talk to him.
This is a guy who would give a talk. He'd get up and give a talk. Sometimes would last 24 hours, literally. He'd keep going.
He made up words, but he didn't have a word.
So, but our the collection of mentors that we have in our lives often come from observation and creating a mosaic, a mentorship mosaic of.
It's the apprentice mode, and that's what Zen training is, the apprentice mode, like a guild. They say that you build a Steinway piano, your master, you're a journeyman or apprentice, doesn't say anything to you. You just stand beside them and watch what they do, and you try to do the same thing.
If we look at, when I was writing that piece about mentoring and meandering, ask almost anybody to talk about their favorite mentor, somebody they admire, and to have and go ask that person about their path. Very rarely was it linear. And the most important lessons often are lessons of agility. And we live in a world now, if it wasn't always already changing anyway, literally at the molecular level, right? Just with technology, the pace of change is insane.
Like a pinball machine.
So the ability to be agile the ability to meander, I would argue, is no longer a negative. He's a meanderer. He can't think straight. He's a wanderer. It's actually now a superpower. So how do we learn that? It doesn't come naturally. We have to watch others. Experiment.
Originally, I think, as a child, that's what you were. That's the way your mind worked. Mm-hmm. But then you were trained away from that by the education system into the channels.
Right. When I write about playfulness and playful thinking, one of the things I write about is when you were a child and you would sit in the woods and you just begin to imagine, you'd see the animals and you'd imagine sort of the Disney version of it, or things like that. Or you'd sit and stare at the wallpaper and you could see the patterns, you imagine the patterns doing something. And that was without hallucinations, right?
Right. Okay. And they were moving.
So, but how do we teach creativity? I don't know if we necessarily can. Nor could I really with this book. The best I could do was work out my own. And I did it somewhat clumsily, I think, in this book, but I tried to do it also with some amount of playfulness. Anyway, still working things out.
I think in Zen and creativity, we teach the method. That's all we can teach is the method. And the person has to find the meaning in the creativity.
Yeah. I think that's true.
Fortunately, we have a method. That's what I liked about Zen.
Yeah.
Something to do.
So anyway, I could go on. There are a lot of kind of elements or sub-elements to this. And it's the best I could do to give you the top line. Thoughts or questions?
Well, psychically, I feel like you're reading my mind because the podcast I just finished is about Bucky and about his attitude towards politics and all the craziness that we're seeing in the world today. So it's very much along these same lines. It's number 90 coming out in a couple of weeks.
Well, I forgot to mention one thing just to circle it back. And that is, I mentioned that the book started, originated from this conversation I had with Jonathan Keats about this conceptual art project he did about creating a clock based on the flow of the river. We have now brought that to Atlanta. And so we have Atlanta River Time. We are creating, there'll be a digital clock here based on the flow of the waterways in the Atlanta area. And by the way, in many cities, right, people have their rivers run through the cities, and people know it. Here, people couldn't, usually you can't find the Chattahoochee unless you have, Google Maps. That's the big river. They can't find, did you know there are two other major rivers here? Flint River and the South River, who knew? So part of it is helping connect people to the idea that as humans, we impact the flow of and the growth rates of natural objects, of the rivers, of trees. So this effort to create clocks based on the flow of rivers is playful, and it's a provocation. It's meant to shake people up, go, what the heck are you doing? What? To get them out to the river, to pause and to enjoy the natural setting. And the interesting thing about rivers is there are patterns to them. So pi is a pattern, right? Kind of. Well, we see pi. People like to try to find pi in everything. Did you know that the meander of a river can be defined by pi? The average meander of a river.
3.1416.
Yeah. So anyway, just a pattern. Pi's everywhere. There it is again in the pattern of meanders. Anyway, we brought that to Atlanta. We're creating not only a digital clock, but erosion calendars, including one in Zona Light Park, which is literally, I'm pointing to Zona Light Park. It's just on the other side of this wall here if you're not in Atlanta right now. And the Peachtree Creek, the South Fork of Peachtree Creek, which feeds the Chattahoochee River, runs behind us. And we'll be placing large stones in there that with dates carved in that will erode over time, over 1,000 years. So, and at the end, we'll have an event for that after that. I may not be there, I don't know. And then we're also creating municipal clock, a monumental clock that will have river time on it on one side and regular time on the other. We're thinking about putting this into the Atlanta airport. We've talked to them about that. That'll really screw up, gate arrival, departure activities. Anyway, so yeah, follow the meanders, come full circle.
Just one quick comment. In Gary Ferguson's second book, he wrote this wonderful book on Zen's Chinese heritage through China, which is like the transmission of the globe, transmission of the patriarchy, which is a meander very much. And the second book was on tracing Bodhidharma's path through China, and they have all these records there. So at one point he's looking for the Yellow River where Bodhidharma was said to have crossed. And he's talking to the local people, and they say, well, it used to be right here, but now it's about a half mile over there. And if you kind of scale back and look at this from space, as we're now able to do, and you could have recorded that river pattern over those centuries, you would have seen it snaking back and forth like a snake, in animation.
And you can often see this meander scars from above, and I'm forgetting the name of the artist, but if you go online and you look up Mississippi River meander map, it's a gorgeous image or series of images that were done a long time ago. But yeah, I mean, nature gives us a lot of creative inspiration, and really play that theme meander. Before that dinner with Jonathan Keats, I didn't really think of meander having anything to do with the river, but Meander, the word meander, comes from the Meander River in Turkey, um, which is the river from which the word meander comes, because the Menderes River is an extraordinarily windy river, and that ultimately, the name of that river ultimately came to mean super windy. So anyway, thoughts or comments from the...
Yeah. So let's let April take over the meandering Q&A here.
And as always, Sangha, if you have questions in the room,
Looks like we have a hand.
who's that?
Hang on, it looks like.
Oh,
no, that's your thing.
that was
That's,
me. Yeah. Just come off of
the cursor here is a hand. So
Yeah.
Looks like we have a hand.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, that's not.
So again, either in the Zendo. Yep. Go ahead.
Fascinating, provocative, which leads me to my question. I like word roots, I like etymology, and it struck me when you were speaking that usually when we say, he provoked me, it's a negative thing.
Yeah.
But when I say to you, it's provocative, it's a positive thing. And then I found myself thinking about, well, what does provocative mean? And I'm going to guess that there's pro and vocative, and I'm wondering if provocative is something that arises before speech. So pro before vocative speech. And if I looked it up, I might find out that it's something else. But the idea that something that is provocative occurs before our ability to talk about it, and we talk about it only after it arises.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Yeah. Well, so much of what we practice when we sit is about finding thought beyond, we could call it non-thinking, but in some ways it's thought beyond words.
Yes.
And if we can, and tapping into that for sure is a creative power. Yeah, I'd have to think about that more. I like that idea, that notion though. And again, that's the idea of a provocation. It gets me thinking about it, thinking in a way I hadn't thought before. There is I mean, look, I didn't write anything. I didn't come up with any new concepts here. I just tried to package them differently in a way that kind of sorted things for me, and maybe allowed other people to enter into the idea of Zen, or what Zen is about, without it being as in a slightly more indirect manner, so I didn't freak people out. Like, hey, this is just a book about Zen. I don't want to read that. That said, I'm not claiming to have invented anything new, and the idea of provocation, as a creative tool, is well known. But there's a guy named Edward de Bono who is, at least I think he proclaims himself. No, he really is a creativity guru, and he wrote a book called P.O., which is his term for a provocation. Basically, in that case, he's just talking about prompts, putting prompts out there that are, bizarre. Like, what if airplanes had no doors? Or something like that. Or what if airplanes had no wings? Or what, something like what? Now create a product, for airlines and what they'll be about in the future. They have no wings, no doors.
Which leads me into my follow-up question.
You got to catch your plane now?
No, very nicely. I wish if I caught my plane, it would probably cut my head off. And I can begin by saying that my father was a high school art teacher, and we used to go to the various museums that were in San Francisco. And one of the things that my father would show me in these various things that were mounted on the walls, and one I remember in particular was that there was a I believe a 17th century seascape, or at least it was ships in the harbor. And he would, because he was known there, they would let him get closer to things than the ordinary person would be. And he would run down his glasses and look at this thing, and he said, "Put too much egg in this." And as a result of this, this was cracking and it was fading, and it would be up for restoration. So in creativity, in someone who is an artist, anybody who is an artist, anybody who is a scientist, that one of the fundamental components of creativity is materials. That you can take a creative person, send them to art school, and a lot of it may be, this is how you work with oils, this is how you mix your oils, this is how you sketch the canvas, this is the fundamental, this is how you fill a flask with a fluid. You take it up to the meniscus, so there's a little dip there. And so where creativity is based on material, and you have to come, there's not a complete meander, I think, is my thought, that it does arise out of pre-existing stuff. You could invent an entirely new way of doing it. You could invent a plane that didn't have wings. You might call it a helicopter. But you would have to have considerable training. Ego Sikorsky, I think, is the one. You have to know considerable about aerodynamics in order to come up to enforce your idea of, yes, I can put the wing as a rotating thing on top, rather than having the wings as things that stick out.
I think you could summarize that in a kind of a Zen framework as the banks form the river, but the river also forms the banks. So it's a complementary relationship. It's not an either or.
And I, by championing the meander, I wasn't trying to dismiss the linear, but only recognize that linear alone, or the materials themselves, isn't all there is. And when we think that's the case, we're probably going to underperform or something. And the idea of creativity, again, you know this, but we're certainly not limiting the conversation here to the arts. We, you know,
Creative accounting.
But maybe not that. So no, we're not limited.
I'll share. Being an artist, I'm a second generation artist, which is pretty much the extent of my resume. I'm going with, but except to say I've been painting for a long time, and the creative process has always been a topic that I've always been fascinated with, because I'm exploring it in pretty much everything. I think we all do everything we do. I've come to find that there are literally only two kinds of painters, which was an interesting dynamic to me, a part of my journey. And the two kinds of painters are, there's a type of painter that is purely reference and needs to gather a lot of reference, so that before he or she ever dips paint to a canvas, knows pretty much what it's going to look like before he or she even starts. And then there's the organic painter that sort of swishes around color until they start to see shapes occur, and then explore that and grow and grow and grow. And it has been my experience that every reference painter is striving to become looser and freer of structure. And every organic painter is striving to find structure. But there's like this line that the both lines meet somewhere in the middle. And that line is the journey. And wherever you are on that process is who you are. And that process is pure motion. It's not stagnated. It's not to be determined. It's not to be judged. It is just the process. And I knew when I was a kid, watching my mom paint, I always imagined that I would, as I got older and through repetition and discipline, that I would have these periods of art, like Picasso, a blue period or this period or whatever. And as I got older, I realized that the imagery of what I was creating was nothing more than a reflection of the process that I was in at that moment. And it was literally the art that was creating me. And I think in many ways, whether it be art, painting, which I see as nothing more than a discipline to a resolve. What Sensei might call a method. I refer to it as a discipline. It could be writing, it could be science, it could be anything. But I do think that this, to some extent, where you are in the creative process is whether you're either trying to destructure or whether you're trying to find structure is simply an individual part of the meandering. And I had a wonderful opportunity to share some time with Andrew, and he did not disappoint. I was looking for a brilliant conversation, and I got it. So if anyone does have opportunity to spend time with Andrew, it's quite beneficial. So thank you.
I'd just say one thing, and since they chime in as well, but yeah, that idea of, one thing I love about the way our practice Sensei has described the Eightfold Path and the idea of right whatever, right speech, right livelihood, right effort is the idea of right as in righting a ship. It's never straight. It's always moving one way or the other, and that's okay, right? If it tilts one way, we don't get upset, we don't fight. If it tilts the other way, we don't celebrate or fight or whatever. It's just going to constantly be going like this, and it's understanding that, accepting it, and watching it. And that's what I think shuffling was about when I mentioned that idea of shuffling. It's just another way to characterize that different definition of right. And if you can do that, there's a little bit of process and there's a little bit of receptivity, I guess. A little bit of effort and a little bit of receptivity. Sometimes here, sometimes there, sometimes the right balance, but you can't count on that, and we don't stick to that. Sensei, these guys may have heard it before, but love for you to just talk about Buddha Seed or whichever was the first painting you did where you felt like there's something working on this. Painting without a painter.
Well, yeah. I started out doing my master's in lithography, printmaking. I chose lithography because I love carrying around big, heavy stones. But I noticed I was using a medium called tush, which is kind of an oily medium, and it interacts with the water. You work on a wet stone. Well, you can work on a dry stone, but I was experimenting with what you now see in my sumi ink and watercolor paintings, which is, as Michael was describing, you're using something and seems inherently disorderly, and it's going to do what it wants to do, and you're trying to contain it in such a way that it produces images and so forth that seem meaningful and you like. But it's certainly not controlling the medium in the usual sense. And I noticed down in the corners and so forth of these images I was producing, and the one Andrew is referencing here is a litho print hanging in our conference room, that somebody was a much better artist than I am, and was doing all these intricate patterns and things. It looked like brain tissue, wood grain, all kinds of sort of beautiful patterning. And so I just started trying to back out and get out of the way of that and let that happen.
By somebody you meant nobody.
Yeah, I showed it to my neighbor who's a ultra-Orthodox rabbi and talked to him about how he was doing the painting. I was out on the patio. He said, "Oh, you let God paint for you." I said, "Well, you can say that. You're a rabbi. I wouldn't say that." I noticed Elle Barnhart is on today, and she's also an artist. I don't want to move in the direction of saying only the arts are creative, but Elle, you might have a comment, I think, in science, and I know a lot of you online tonight. We've had personal dokusan, so I know you're very creative in your approach to what you do. The IT guys, I just sort of don't understand because they're working in an invisible medium, but that's, I think, is very creative. So, Elle, did you have anything to say? I know you're listening with perked up ears as an artist. You know how to come off mute? Golden silence.
And that's okay. While we wait for Elle to get offline, I wanted to comment too. Keisei, one of the things I love about this book is that it's bringing forward really the teaching into the moment of even creativity. There's no place that the teaching is not, and how is that expressed individually in different ways. So I love the take on the Eightfold Path that you took with the shuffle, and really trying to really talk about how that looks and bringing that forward. As we evolve and as time passes by, the teachings are constant. So I just really appreciate that take on that and how you brought that forward even into the now. So I just had to say that, but I love that part of the book.
I appreciate that. It reminded me too, there's one thing I want you all to know. If you have any interest in reading the book, there is a lot about not only Sensei and his upbringing and the intersection of creativity and Zen in his life, but also Matsuoka Roshi. The book does go through his, because he certainly lived a nonlinear life. Maybe when he was in Japan, it seemed like he'd be on a path that seemed straight, right? I'm going to be a Zen priest, and here are the things you do. And then he came to America in 1939, and then Pearl Harbor hit, and life was no longer linear. So the book does go into that and his creative meanders and some of the encounters along the way. When you follow a meander, you hit some rapids sometimes and some obstacles, and one in his case was the FBI. So I'll just leave that for another, just to provoke you into wanting to read this. You can read more there. Other thoughts?
Well, I see you came off camera, or you came on camera. Are you able to come off mute, or do you want to? You may not want to. Just do thumbs down if you don't want to.
I don't really have a whole lot to say. I am starting my art process from the beginning, and it's very linear. I do a nose, do eyes, do lips, and what you're saying, Andrew, is that I don't have to do that. I just want to know which way I should follow.
Just get a piece of paper, or not even a piece of paper, any material, a pencil, and let the pencil take you for a walk. That's a virtual, bastardized quote of Paul Klee, who's a well-known artist in the 20th century, and also
Bauhaus.
Bauhaus instructor, and he would say, take a line for a walk. Is what he said, meaning, just sit down and see what happens. Try, instead of the lips, what Michael was suggesting, which is, just put something down on the page and look what it tells you, and follow that. In the book, I talk about splash painting, which was actually basically originated by Zen monks. where they would just fling ink on a page, see what it looked like to them, and then paint around it. And it's amazing what they would come up with as a result of that. And so it's a fun thing to do. And, what we don't want to have happen is we impose so much process on ourselves, so much expectation of perfection, etc., that we take the fun out of this activity. And that's true whether you're creating art or creating a computer program or anything else. I think right livelihood is livelihood, in which we can add something creative to the world, but also that adds something back to us in that way, nourishes us. So hopefully your art becomes like that. And then it doesn't mean you stop doing lifts or anything like that. It means you can reapproach them with a fresh eye.
Thank
Is this on? Is this going? Okay. I guess I just wanted to say, yeah, Paul Klee is absolutely, in addition to being a brilliant painter, is incredibly articulate and has a bunch of art instruction manuals in particular, and he's like maybe one of the most brilliant writers of who's also a painter in that way. But I just wanted to say thank you so much. The book looks absolutely beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing all this insight with us. And I really do appreciate this deconstruction of creative process or practice. And I absolutely love this image of meandering, and it does call to at least to my mind, this idea of stream entering, and I don't know, you sort of emphasize this nonlinear, spontaneous response or agility. And I sort of wanted to ask a question about the scramble or the shuffle, or just how you would characterize it. Are you said directly identifying it with aleatory compositional strategies, or is there? Do you get what I'm saying? Are you just saying, oh, we're mechanically randomizing elements, so we're inventing? I will just say that.
Well, actually,
I think
I'll
there's.
say about that.
Oh, sorry. Well, just to close the thought, it's like if you're trying to produce something novel, that's how I see the. And tell me if I've got the frame wrong there. But if you genuinely want to, you can't do it by copying something, and also it can't be a purely mechanical combination of pre-existing elements. At least copyright law would suggest that. That it takes a human being with an intent. Even if you say God painted it, it's still your copyright, right? Anyway, that was the thought.
Go back. What was the first part of?
Meandering is a beautiful metaphor. It struck me as aligned with the Zen notion of stream entering and sort of spontaneous responses and agility. And it struck me that this shuffling comes more from that space than just mechanical combination of aleatory composition. Right. Yeah. So one of the other major characters in this book that helps bring these ideas to life is John Cage. You know John Cage. John Cage, if you don't know John Cage, was maybe the most famous experimental musician that America has produced. And John Cage was also a teacher at Black Mountain College. And he was there at the same time that Buckminster Fuller was there, and the two became good friends. John Cage, you may know, if this has come across your consciousness, but he created a piece, just as an example of what this guy would do, called 4 minutes and 33 seconds, in which he goes on stage, sits at a piano, lifts his pants out, and then doesn't play anything for 4 minutes and 33 seconds. Or sometimes he does that with an orchestra, and they don't play for 4 minutes and 33 seconds. And the idea is that it's the sort of ambient sound. Music is more than just the composed melody, but it's sound and it's other things. So it's a provocation to hear differently.
He was credited with saying the music is the space between the notes.
The space between the notes. So Sensei mentioned chants earlier, and chants is a big part of what's written about in this book. What John Cage would do is he had a method for creating music by chance. So it's sort of a combination of method and madness together, right? John Cage would take the I Ching and somehow take the outcome of throwing the yarrow sticks or whatever, or flipping coin, whatever he did with the coin, and he would have that determine what notes would go down. And from that, the compositions were created. I actually, so that's written about in this book, and also what I did is during writing this was I tried doing that myself. Not to create music, but just to make life choices.
Coincidentally, Steve and I were talking about, you mentioned Nurse Cunningham, right? Oh, tell him, you have the mic, tell him about that experiment.
So Merce Cunningham was John Cage's partner also at Black Mountain College. And Merce Cunningham, for those of you who don't know, was a sort of a contemporary dance master. Modern dance,
I had asked composer friends of mine, was it necessary that John Cage, having conceived the idea of 4 minutes, 33 seconds, was it necessary to do it? And he said, well, go see this concert that's coming up. And the concert was that Merce Cunningham, John Cage had been dead some time by then, but Merce Cunningham had come to the campus. And that what you were about to see is a film that John Cage was instructed to come up with music for 38 minutes, 28 and a half minutes, and that I was instructed to come up with the choreography for the same amount of time, and these would simply be overlaid on each other.
And they did them separately without
And they
each other
did,
knowing.
and they did separately without each other knowing. And he said this, and the piece proceeded, came to an end, and he said, are there questions? And someone raised their hand and said, it's very interesting how you were able to coordinate the dance with the music. How did you do that? And Merce Cunningham said, as I said,
yeah,
that that John Cage wrote a piece of music that was this long. I came up with the choreography that was this long, and we put them together, so there's no consultation.
Right.
Are there any other questions? Yeah, I found the way the patterns suited each other was very interesting, so that John Cage must have had some ideas in mind, and that you must have had some ideas in mind, and that these things came together. How did you arrange that? As I said,
yeah, right.
and this proceeded to 5 questions that were exactly of the same nature, that they were phrased differently. And at that point, I said, what John Cage is doing needs to be done, because without any, at the time I was quite judgmental about it, but now looking back at it without any judgment, the concept of randomness and the concept of randomness as creativity was not something that was in the ordinary human psyche, that John Cage had to do these things. Right. Indeterminacy is my favorite.
Yes.
Where 60 stories, each of which lasts 1 minute, no matter whether it's longer or shorter, set to random music by Merce Cunningham, and you see the patterns. And what is that? Pareidolia.
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 Pareidolia is the human tendency, or it's, I don't know how we describe it, but the act of looking for patterns or imagining we see patterns.
Mm-hmm. So the zodiac is the example.
The zodiac, or I don't know, maybe covered up now, but when I sit facing the wall over there, I see an elephant.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not because I'm coming off drink or anything like that. I just literally, this thing looks like, I swear to God.
And you want to change the place where you sit when you see that, because you can never unsee it.
I keep seeing Dumbo.
Paul's
that was an interesting pattern, because I was just going to ask whether the attachment to seeing patterns where they aren't there is in fact a form of delusion and confusion.
Mm-hmm. It may be, but I also think it's, I don't know if we can call it delusion, if it's just the way our brains naturally act. I guess so.
Just a small point on that. We've all had this experience of hearing Mary had a little lamb running through our mind when we're sitting and you can't get it out of your mind. And not only when you...
Well, now I can't.
Yeah, right. Now I mention it. But I think it's not just that human beings have a preference for finding patterns. It's a built-in way the mind works. In other words, what we're actually hearing is a large dissonant chord of all kinds of sounds. It's as if your brain is full of sound-emitting diodes, and you have all of the other sound sources that are real stimulus coming from somewhere. And so the function of the chitta, the discriminating mind, is to bring order out of chaos. And so the mind will notice, so what I coach people to do is listen for the sound. You'll hear that sound. It's actually there. And it's may waver and it may not be perfect pitch or whatever, but you also hear and you'll hear and then so the brain puts it together in a familiar orderly sequence to bring a kind of order out of the chaos that is what you're actually experiencing. So the way to stop the rumination, the iteration of it over and over and over is just to listen to each sound until you actually hear it. And then if you listen to the others, like listening to an orchestra, you hear all the voices simultaneously. It just becomes a huge dissonant chord.
I think sometimes too, with our practice, also it helps us to disrupt what we think our mind normally does with the patterns too. So that's kind of the point too, right? Just like with that piece.
Habit patterns.
Let's just stop.
Exactly. And this is what our sitting is really about, and that's why it just happens to. Again, we sit without purpose specifically, but there doesn't mean there isn't benefit. And one place of benefits is that practice is really great for creativity.
What you did not point out is the pause that you mentioned, provocative and pause, is exactly that. Like we'd have a prompt and a writing exercise and do that for an hour, and then we'd take a pause and sit for half an hour. And we'd go back to provocation and then sit. So the pause is specifically Zen meditation.
And anybody who sat for even a second knows that pause is provocative in and of itself.
Yep.
We're not used to that. Yep. And all kinds of weird stuff goes through it. Whoa. Anyway.
Didn't see any hands online. Are all you people just frustrated with us? What?
Well, thank you for taking time to listen. I know we're close to the top of the hour, so.
Yeah. And Keisei, it's always a pleasure to have you come in. Again, as you said, if you have a conversation with Keisei, you're always getting some type of insight. So we really appreciate you always bringing that perspective for us, and then always circling back around to the practice. So again, thank you for your continued practice and your service. So it's been a pleasure. And again, just as always, we wanted to circle back again to thank everyone that is a consistent contributor to our Sangha. We're able to continue to do the things that we do, support our teachers, our building, our center, and be able to continue to provide programs. So if you're not already a consistent contributor, we ask that if you found value in what we do, please consider doing that. And again, we're grateful for your practice and your presence as always. Sensei, Hojo, Sensei, anything else?
Yeah, I had one comment on, I just wanted to say that the Thursday night Zen Mind or Zen Talk Forum went very well, I think. And those of you who are not aware of it, check it out. And we will have openings from time to time, which is limited to 12 people max, but we'll have opportunities for you to join. And just wanted you to take this word shuffling and imagine something. What if the rule were that when you play poker, you can never shuffle the deck? You have to have the deck always in the same order, and you deal it in the same order, and then try to predict what would happen, right? But when you shuffle the deck, that's when you introduce this concept of chance. And I maintain that there is no such thing as chance, but you have a relative level of disorderliness or unpredictability that then comes up in combinations that you would never come up with for yourself. So that's what we mean by chance. Shuffling the deck. So shuffle your deck These are my instructions to you.
Thou shalt shuffle and then sit. Where would you find the book? I didn't pay him for that. Follow the Meander, available on Amazon.com in Audible, Kindle, or softcover formats. Are you reading the Audible? I am reading the Audible. So, yeah, that was fun to do.
It's a good read.
So, good compliment to the original Frontier, which is mentioned often in this book. That is true.
We'll do it now. I'll do our closing verses and we have
Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Illusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it. Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it. Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Illusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it.
Can everybody have a great week? Thanks so much for showing up. Continue to just keep on sitting. Thanks so much.